Hi everyone, welcome to episode number 3. Here we're going to continue with our mold design by making some changes to accommodate either customer specs or your company specs. So one thing we want to do is we want to start going through how we want to, which style of guide pins we want to do and things like that. So the first thing we want to do is start using the modify button. And we have a modify button right here under the modify pane. We have this button right here. This is the most common button you will use in XMD for modifying sizes and the way components interact with XMD. So size would probably be the most common thing you'd use, but you also can modify things such as the units that the product is in. So whether it's a metric or an imperial component, or maybe the way the component interacts with the mold, so the direction of a component, so maybe your guide pins, you want to go from the core instead of your cavity, etc. So we're going to kind of go through a lot of that. So we're going to start off with changing some guide pins. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the guide pins. I'm going to increase them from a 1 1/4 to a 1.5 inch. And we have some buttons on the side here, which is olive type, group, and single, and you'll get to see how this works in a little bit. We're going to start off, in this case, olive type, because we want all the guide pins to change. So we go ahead and say OK, and it changes. Now XMD also understands that we couldn't have those guide pins in that same location. They had to be pushed inboard a bit. So as you can see, they moved. They shifted a little bit in because of the size increasing. We can also change the type of guide pin that we're using. So if we go to change type, and I go to a standard and say OK, it's going to let me know that some stuff in my material list is going to change, and it's going to change that guide pin style for me. So just like that, we have everything changed. So now what we're going to do now is we're going to actually invert the bushing. Okay? So by me only picking on the bushing, I'm affecting the bushing itself. So I'm going to go ahead and say invert it, and it spins it around, so now the bushing is from the top and the hole now goes in differently. We can also invert the entire assembly. So I can, by clicking on the guide pin there, I can say invert assembly, and it flips the whole thing around. Okay? So you have a lot of control very, very easily on how you want this to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invert the assembly again. I'm also going to change it back to the same type I had before, the headless. Okay? And as you see, it puts a screw in that holds that in and everything. So all that stuff's taken care of. And I'm going to re-invert my bushing and put it back. Okay? So very, very easy to make manipulations. Now if we go down here to screws, what do we want to do with the screws? Well, we have several options with screws. So one of the things is to change the mount pattern style. So currently the way this mount pattern for these is set up is we have long screws all on the rails, and then we just have some assembly screws for short screws, one here and one here. So this creates, as you can see in this box, because I clicked to modify size, you can see in this box here that this makes for an 8-inch screw. Maybe in your company, maybe you have a standard you don't want to exceed 6 inches, let's just say, for purchasing reasons or whatever. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this mount pattern style to a double mount. Say OK. So XMD has the intelligence built into it to understand, well, okay, then we're going to move those screws up. Right? We're going to counterbore them into the rails, as you can see they are, and we're going to put a short screw at every single one of them. Okay? So very, very easy to do those types of things. Now if I go to my section A, you can see that's all up to date. There's my long screw there, and there's my short screws there. Okay? So very, very easy to do, and I can manipulate these things also in 2D. So for example, let's say I want to have, in most cases we like to put the bushing, the shoulder of the bushing in the retainer plate. This allows us, because sometimes the ejector plate we don't have any machining to do from the top, so it'd be a waste. We'd be flipping the plate over just to do the bushing. So if you put the bushing in the retainer plate, you almost always have ejector pins and whatnot. So what we can do though is, let's say we do want it the other way, we can click here and say switch plate, and we'll say olive type, and it moves it right down to the ejector plate. So I'm not actually physically moving anything, I'm just telling the software how I want it to be, and it's understanding these things. So remember, the XMD is a software that's been built by mold designers for mold designers. So we understand the terminology, we understand what people are looking for. So it's not just a bunch of solids put together that looks like a mold. It actually has all that intelligence built into it. So we're going to say modify size here as well, and I can change diameters, I can change fenders, as you can see, I can change metric, and I can have some metric and some inch stuff in my job, whatever I want. So I'm going to go ahead and just say I'm going to change these to a PCS component, and I'm going to maybe go to 2-inch. Okay, I'm going to say all type. Okay, and we'll see what a 2-inch looks like. Right, so there's a 2-inch. So now what we can quickly see by looking at this is, well, we don't really like this 2-inch, you know, because we don't like the bushing hanging past, or maybe it's fine with you, whichever. But we can go ahead and say modify size, and maybe we go back down to it 1.5 inch. And there we go. And that's your 3D, your 2D, everything's up to date. Your material list is up to date, everything. So it's very, very easy to do. What if we want to manipulate some screws? So a good example is this screw, these long screws. Maybe I want to go shorter still, so I've got 6-inch, but I want to use 5-inch because I found some on the floor. I can change to a 5-inch length, say OK, and it knows to increase that counterbore for me, but leave this alone. It's quite easy. Very, very easy to do. Some other things that we can do with the modify size box is to modify some pillar supports. So we have some really cool things that we can do based on quadrants in our job. So the way XMD sees things, it understands quadrants. So this is one quadrant of my tool, and this is one quadrant of my tool, and then this is one quadrant, and that's one quadrant. Okay. So one thing I can do is I can use the group function for certain components, such as pillar supports. I can say modify size to these pillar supports. I'm going to say 4-inch, but maybe I want to leave these 2 in the middle. I can say by group, say OK, and just these 4 on the outside move or change. And then I can also use the same thing for the move command. So if I go in here, we have a move command here with several commands. I can say in any direction, say this pillar support, and once again I can choose by group, and I can place them wherever I want, and you can see those 4 only moved. Okay. So I have the ability to manipulate things based on these quadrants, and it allows me to keep things symmetrical if need be. Very, very easy to work with. Group works a little different for certain components. For example, for eye bolt holes, which you'll notice we didn't put these eye bolt holes in. XMD took care of that when we started the job up. But what we can do is we can still relocate them if we wish. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want to move eye bolts by group, and I'm going to move it here. See how they all move. You can see these ones here on the sides and in the length. So for eye bolts, it sees group as all the ones in that same plate. Okay, so all the ones in the core block, it moved. Okay, and that would be the same if I was to change the sizes of them. So that's how a lot of things change for your guide pins and whatnot. So getting back into moving things, one thing that's really, really cool is its understanding of your parting line and part for things like ejector pins and return pins. So right now the return pin is actually up where the lock is, and that's why you see it up here. I'm going to do this in 2D, and I'll show you again in 3D. But I'm going to use the move horizontal. So what that does is that keeps things moving just straight back and forth. You can notice the height change. That it's following down the lock right there, and then I can place it. Okay, so if I go now to my core 3D, maybe I'll turn on my retainer plate as well. Say show components. Okay, you can see that one that I moved is right there. Now I could have done by group and it would have moved all of them. That would be perfectly okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to undo this and put it back to where it was. And we're going to do it again, but in 3D this time. So you can kind of see it. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to move it. We're going to pick this one, and I'm going to move it this way, and you can see it move down. Let's do this. I'm going to say by group, move it over to here. Okay, and you'll see they're all moved. Right? So all 4 of them moved for me, and the heights have been updated. So they were up here at the locks, and now they're down here. So that's how we can work, and we can move things around in all these existing components. Now if I go back to this original modify one and I pick on a return pin, I can do things like changing. Right now it's cleared through, but maybe we need to ream them. I can go ahead and say I want an 1.25" ream on all of type, say OK. Now if I zoom in up there, you can see that there's a reamed hole there now. There's a step. Okay, so this ream now has been worked out for me. All I had to do was tell what length I wanted the ream to be, and it's there. Now keep in mind, if you always ream your return pins, you'd be able to set in the configuration file to tell it to always ream it to whatever lengths you want, and it would automatically go in that way. But maybe you only have that issue every once in a while where you have to ream them, and so you might want to leave your config file set to clear through. Okay? Or you can make a different config file for that particular customer where you have to do it with. So you have options on how you can do that. So that's just really quickly going through some of the capabilities we have with modifying, say, sizes and locations. Okay? Some other options that we have is modifying by colors and fonts and things like that. So for example, here I have this ejector guide. Maybe I just want to show it a different color. I can pick on a different color, whichever color I want, say OK, and once again I can change just the one return pin if I wanted, or I can say by group or by all type, however I want, and that return pin changes. If I go to my core plan view, you can even see they're changing there too. So it's taken care of in my 3D and 2D and everything. So it's very useful. Another very often used command is the title block command. We kind of went through this a little bit in one of the earlier episodes, but we'll go through it a little more in depth here, is for our title blocks. So what I can do for title blocks is I can say it's a one cavity injection mold. Okay? As I mentioned before in previous episodes, it doesn't have to be an injection mold. These works just as well with blow molds and compression molds. We do it all the time. And then, a part name, so it's a housing. It's polypro. Okay. I'll just make up a part number, call it 101. Okay. If you know how many sheets you're going to have in the job, you can put that in there now. There's going to be, say, 10 sheets. The customer is XMD customer. Okay. Your scale is full. Manufacturer would be synergetic in this case. And if they have a tool number, you can put your manufacturer's tool number, which would be your particular customer. Okay, your job number, call it whatever you want. Designer. Your start date, it's 2013, December, whatever you want to put. It's a 700-ton press, let's say. Okay, and whatever your customer's tool number is. Okay? And then when you say OK, if I go down here to the material list, everything's all filled in. And that information I filled in is not just on this core plan view. That is on all the views. So everything's all filled in on every single view. And making this title block, which we will go through in a future tutorial, making this title block is very easy, and you can make title blocks for different customers however you need to do it. And this title block can be completely configured to how you want your title block to look. So that is kind of quickly going through some of the commands for modifying existing components in a job. Play with all the commands and see what you get. Thank you.